Welcome to The Scope with Dr. K, where together we can reimagine GI care.
Welcome to The Scope with Dr. K. I'm Dr. Kosinski. We're going to open the show today, as we always do, by stating that the goal of this series is to present you with a broad scope of value-based care issues, mainly involving the field of gastroenterology, but also outside of GI as well. We continue this month with an interesting representative from the provider side, but one whose companies provide support services to providers as well as advisory services. Our guest today is Praveen Suthrum. Praveen is an entrepreneur and a healthcare futurist. He co-founded NextServices, a company that helps healthcare businesses thrive through better, improved back office operations and enhanced technology. He also recently co-founded a second company, NovoLiver, a company that helps reverse fatty liver disease through weight loss. Additionally, he runs a digital mastermind program for gastroenterology leaders. Praveen has been featured in Forbes, the Economic Times, Detroit News, and Stat News. He's the author of 2 books, Private Equity in Gastroenterology and Scope Forward, books that have transformed the space of gastroenterology. He serves on the board of Dr. Mohan's Diabetes Center, one of the largest VC-funded diabetic chains in India. Welcome to the show, Praveen.
Thank you, Dr. Kosinski. It's a distinct honor and pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad that we're talking. I always enjoy our conversations, so I'm really looking forward to this one.
Well, I am too. I enjoyed it when I appeared on your podcast, and I'm looking forward to today. You begin Scope Forward with a discussion of what you call exponential technologies. What are exponential technologies?
Sure. So Larry, exponential technologies are advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital biology, virtual reality, augmented reality, sensors, even the microbiome, which would actually come under digital biology for me, and robotics, 3D printing. So we have a whole slew of these exponential or advanced technologies, and they're coming into healthcare and even gastroenterology in a big way. Taking a step back, if you actually think about why exactly are these technologies exponential and why should they be called so? If you go back to the days of the microprocessor and when computing chips began doubling in speed and performance and reducing in cost, if you go back to those days, the early days of the microprocessor, there was a man called Gordon Moore, whom we all know. At that time, he was in Intel, and he made a prediction that you can cram more number of integrated circuits or components into an integrated circuit, and it would keep doubling every few years, and it would keep reducing in cost at the same time. And at that time, he said it would go for about 10 years. Now here we are 50 plus years later. Moore's prediction has become Moore's law, and it still holds true. So now, if you see what is underlying digitization of anything, any industry, it is this prediction. It is this prediction that is powering all of digitization. So when a field or a product or a service becomes digital, then it has the scope to follow Moore's law. So that's why it escalates rapidly, it expands rapidly, and it grows exponentially. At the same time, the costs keep coming down, and it never works in isolation. So it works, all these different exponential technologies work together. And I chose to start with that chapter in GI because that's what I saw coming. I think we're in the thick of things today. We're in the middle of it.
Well, we certainly are. As someone who practiced in the analog era, probably for the majority of my career, it's been an explosion since we've been converting to the digital era. So let's focus on GI, since your book really focused on everything from a GI perspective. How has the shift to digital affected gastroenterology?
So let us consider two of the exponential technologies, right? Just rolling back the clock a little bit. In 2012, I went to Singularity University, which is in the Bay Area, for an executive program. And I had an interesting experience. They brought a self-driving car, and at that time it was the Google self-driving car. So I sat in it, and it was a Lexus, and it was a research project. So there was a laptop, and the laptop had wires that ran behind the steering wheel. And at that time, if you think about it, all the auto companies dismissed it, saying that it is a research project. And to be fair, it was one. Now, on top of that car was a big scanner called the LiDAR scanner. It was a gray looking device, and that kept rotating 360 degrees, and it kept taking images and videos all the time. Now, that entire car is more than a reality today. As you know, the service, Google service and car is called Waymo. And it's likely that all of us are going to be sitting in some self-driving vehicle or the other. Just over the weekend, Tesla simply upgraded itself with a full self-driving update. And it was a software update. And just like that, the entire car became almost self-driving, and people have been testing it. So these are very, very interesting times. So come to, fast forward to 2018, 2019, around that time frame, I kept hearing a lot of noise about stool DNA testing in the GI community. And but the noise was about, that it's not the right test. Most of the noise was about that. It was, I think the company was doing an ad campaign, and there was a lot of resistance in the GI community about that ad campaign, that it's not correct, and colonoscopies is the traditional colonoscopy is the gold standard. And to be fair, that's true. But to me, from the outside, and as a technologist or a business person, and just viewing everything very objectively, very neutrally, it seemed almost like a replay of the story of the self-driving car. So back then, there were the auto companies that were dismissing it. And here was a medical industry that was also dismissing something, that was in the horizon. So I became curious, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about this. And I saw that at the end of the day, yes, it did not have the 100% sensitivity or specificity that is required. But at the end of the day, it was digital biology, and it was generating data. So if a self-driving car can learn as a system, like, because when a single Google car drives a mile, the entire Google self-driving system learns, or the Waymo system learns. Same with Tesla. So I began asking, why can't this happen, with stool DNA testing? With every test, if the company or companies are generating data, then with more data, then the entire system is going to learn. So that's the first trend. Digital biology is going to come into GI and many other medical specialties in a huge, huge way. And it's just not going to be about screening for one cancer, but maybe 15 different types of cancers once liquid biopsy is a reality. And there are many companies that are behind it. It's just not the number of companies, but it's also the sheer amount of capital that is being invested in this area. So that's one technology. The second one is artificial intelligence, or AI. And again, I want to draw back on the self-driving car because it's such a fascinating example. Now, if you think about the amount of computing power that is needed for the LiDAR scanner or the self-driving car to not blink, not even once, and to keep his eyes open, not just on the road, but 360 degrees all around, and analyze that video in real time, we're talking about a huge amount of computing power. And end of the day, what is it doing? It's recognizing patterns. And it's recognizing patterns that for a computer is the same. So the other day, actually, just a few days ago at the GI Mastermind, you mentioned that I showed a face recognition algorithm in action, and I showed AI in endoscopy in action. And I asked the question, does it really matter for a computer whether you're showing a face or a polyp? Because end of the day, it's a pattern. It's going to look for certain patterns and classify it and say, this is a red card, or this is such a face, he's smiling, he's sad, whatever. So if it can do that for self-driving, if it can do that for facial recognition, very easily it should be able to do for a pattern such as a polyp. It will classify it and so on. So these are just two technologies. Now imagine a whole slew of technologies like robotics, sensors, ingestibles, 3D printing, virtual reality, augmented reality, and everything acting at the same time. So that's what's at stake, Larry.
Praveen, that was fantastic. A couple of comments on what you just told the listeners. As far as the liquid biopsies, patients will put their arm out to have a blood test very willingly. We've all done it for many, many years. That's a far cry from going through a prep and undergoing an invasive procedure. And if only 25% of the population has polyps, why are we subjecting 100% of the population to invasive procedures? So this will satisfy a need of the consumer, and CMS has followed suit. They've actually approved second level digital testing as an approved service, so that if someone has just an FIT test and they're positive on that FIT test, they're approved to get a second level liquid biopsy, let's say, in testing. So that is really where the population, I know we're going to get to talking about patient needs later, but the patients really have to be kept in mind. And as far as the AI is concerned, the variation in outcome from providers, and I spent 35 years doing this, and I know I only did perfect colonoscopies, right? Well, the artificial intelligence is much less likely to have the same degree of variability that we see from human providers. So it's going to be very interesting. The pharmaceutical industry with studies are really interested in this AI piece, because that can allow them to perform drug studies or technology studies with more reliability in the outcomes. Very fascinating. I love the way you tied together the imaging of a face with the imaging of a colon, and you are absolutely correct. Your second section, and one where you actually interviewed me for Scope Forward, was a section focused on business consolidation, specifically what's occurring in the private equity space. How do you see private equity investments changing the practice of GI?
So, Larry, it has already changed the practice of GI, I'd say. Back in 2019, when I wrote the book Private Equity in Gastroenterology, it was intended to be an ebook. But then I saw people printing it, taking color prints of it wherever I went. So I came back and told my team, I said, hey, this needs to be a real book. And that's what it was. Back then, I'd made a prediction that we'd see about 8 to 12 private equity platforms in GI. And the way I made that prediction was not because I knew what was going to happen in GI. I just simply looked over the shoulders of dermatology and other specialties where the PE players were investing. So it wasn't about the medical specialty, but it was more to do with the behavior of investors. So once they see success or financial success in a certain area, they're going to look for similar patterns in other medical specialties, and GI was right. And then, as we saw throughout 2019 and 2020, the industry massively scaled up in terms of private equity platforms and investments and so on. As you know, the PE platforms operate in different phases, or different types of PE platforms operate at different types of market levels. So the current play that we are seeing is making, forget my, pardon my language, a cottage industry into a sophisticated, consolidated industry. That's what they're doing. And the work that they're all doing, and every PE company has a gestation period of 3 to 7 years. So let's say an average of 5, and that's what we saw with GastroHealth. So within 5 years, they invested and then they exited, and here's where we are at the second bite of the apple there. So if you look at what the current set of PE companies are doing, they've taken this fragmented industry and they're consolidating it. They've put these practices together and they're moving the industry from a medical practice level to an organization or a business level. So the entire industry is shifting from a practice of gastroenterology to the business of gastroenterology. And there is no turning back the clock on that. That is what is happening, and that's where we are going. So if this is the phase that we are playing in, the next phase would invite even more sophisticated investors into the mix. And the industry will keep getting consolidated. It's not a short-term game. It's going to continue for several years ahead, and with increasing levels of sophistication. So if you consider outside of the healthcare industry, some of the companies that we routinely use, let's take Hertz. It's a company that went bankrupt during the COVID period. But we've all used Hertz as a rental car company, and they operated quite well. And they gave good service. They were on top of the game, and so on and so forth. Now, they were private equity funded. So just like that, we're going to see this change in gastroenterology where the industry will be divided amongst the PE funded GI companies, if I can call them so. And there will be several practices that will choose not to do private equity, and there'll be some more that will choose to align with a hospital system. And then there will be some that will do strategic deals, such as Capital Digestive has done. We'll see more of those. So we'll see a mix of all this in the coming years.
Let me take a little breather here. If you have just tuned in, you're listening to The Scope with Dr. K. Our guest today is Praveen Suthrum, author of Scope Forward. We are using the major sections of his book to frame our discussion today. One of the things you move to in your book when you're discussing this is you bring in system consolidation versus consumer consolidation. And I found it interesting that you talked about the difference between CVS Health and United Healthcare. I thought it would be useful for you to expand on this podcast.
Absolutely, Larry. But I want to touch back on a point on private equity, before moving on to this part of the conversation, which is, I hear gastroenterologists asking the question, private equity is good or bad? Is it nice or evil, and so on? That is not the question, because this wave is already happening, and the consolidation is happening. It's an individual choice whether a practice decides to do it or not. But the more important question is, how do you make it a good one or the right one? And if physicians, and especially gastroenterologists, can be in the driving seat and not to take a step back, just because it's about business, or tomorrow it's going to be about technology. But if they get educated, and that's been the premise of the GI Mastermind, is that physicians are some of the smartest people on the planet. It's not easy to become a doctor. It is just that they've not paid attention to the business aspects as much of a medical organization, they've not paid attention to the technology aspects as much. But if they do, this is not going to be as difficult. And the next set of physician leaders who are evolving if they can be nicely trained across the board, and then I think they'll do the right thing. And ultimately, if doctors do the right thing, it will be great for patients. And that's my belief. That's my strong belief, on private equity and everything else that's happening on the consolidation front. So the
Well,
doctors must lead.
we discussed this very subject when you interviewed me. And I think I share what you're saying there. The word culture to me becomes really, really paramount. The culture of a provider providing care for a patient has to be retained. What the business structure is can fluctuate, can mature through consolidation and the adoption of technology. But I hope that in this transition to the corporatization of medicine from cottage industry to a corporate model, that we retain that culture around doctors caring for patients. We can't lose that. We lose that, we lose the whole thing. Let's shift gears here. You spent a significant amount of space in the book discussing patient behavior, asking, how do I feel good? How do I look good? How do I live forever? This was also quite interesting to read. Tell us about your research on this.
Sure. So for me, amongst the four trends, it's the most ignored trend. I'd guess that most gastroenterologists would look at this trend from the high level and say, look, I know all about patients. I see them every day. But Larry, this is the trend that is actually disrupting the entire market, and including GI. So I'll share my thoughts on it. If you look at what's happening at a societal level, society is changing. It's changing. 50 years ago, the privileged people got antibiotics and medications. Today, the privileged people don't go behind medications. They are going after different types of treatments and different types of therapies that is going to reverse their conditions or their disease and keep them healthy. And they're just not happy with, just being healthy. In fact, people want to upgrade themselves like computer systems. They want to upgrade their bodies. They want to look better. They want to feel stronger, and they want to live forever. And that's exactly why longevity is a huge upcoming industry, and there's billions of capital being invested in that space, surely because of the fact that people want to live longer. Actually, the people investing in those companies want to live longer because they like their life, currently, like, so they don't want it to end. And so there's a lot of innovation happening in this space, a lot of it. So now, when you consider that in the context of medicine, private practice medicine, or even gastroenterology, here we are sitting in a consultation room, with a patient, making them wait for a really long time, and then they come in, and then we have a conversation, and in the conversation we say that, look, I got to do a colonoscopy, endoscopy to tell you, what's wrong with you, and we do that, and then we say that, look, something is wrong with, so you remove a polyp or two. They come back, and then you tell them, you got to exercise, eat right, and then come back and see me in 6 months. Some do, many don't, and I know that is the problem that you're addressing and correcting at Sonar MD, which is fantastic. So, but if you think about it, these patients have got other options. Let's consider a condition like IBS. Now, an IBS patient, and I can very safely bet that some of these IBS patients are using an app called Calm, or one or more of these meditation apps like Headspace, or all these have become very, very popular. And they're using some of these techniques which are outside of the regular healthcare realm to reverse their conditions. And they're paying with their dollars, and they're paying with their time and their attention. And if you actually see from a business standpoint, Calm is not a little app sitting somewhere. They received a valuation of $2 billion Now, if you compare that with what's happening with private equity in GI, it actually trumps it, right? Like, so it's interesting for me to look at these different trends at the same time. Now, consider another company called Bold Health, which is moving from London to the US to create a complete digital GI service. Yet another company called Oshi Health that's already in the space. They have a great amount of funding and they're raising more money. Again, they've relaunched themselves as a telemedicine platform for gastroenterologists. And if you consider companies like Teladoc, which went and bought Livongo for several billions of dollars, they're not just a US company, but they are a global company. From what I remember, they're in some 70 different countries. And I learned that they're approaching gastroenterologists to join their platform. Now, if you think about why is all this happening, all that these companies are doing is they're listening to the patient as a consumer. They're just listening to them. They don't want to wait in the office. They want to see the doctor from their home. They want to see them through an app. They do not want to take, many of them do not want to take drugs or medication. They want to heal the natural way. They need hand holding and help on the diet. They need to know how to exercise. They want to learn meditation techniques. It used to be a strange thing to say this even 5 years ago, but now it's so much so much in the mainstream that they actually want help with reducing their stress, because stress is causing a lot of chronic GI conditions, and they want to know how to sleep better. So they want this basic stuff, but we don't sell. I'm using the word sell. We don't sell this stuff in the private practice GI domain or even in the regular healthcare domain. So they're taking their money and dollars and going elsewhere. And that is the trend of patient behavior.
Praveen, thank you so much for being on today. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. You can learn more about the show on the programs page on healthcarenowradio.com, and lend your voice to the conversation on Twitter at HCNowRadio. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at SonarMD. We're bringing patients, providers, and payers together to reimagine GI care. Until next time, I'm Dr. K. Stay well.
Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. K. Tune in with me next time to reimagine the scope of GI care. If we build it, they will join.